Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you so much for joining the first ever webinar that we're doing to announce Celonis for the software development lifecycle, and it is being powered by Bloomfilter. I'm Erik Severinghaus, the co-founder and co-CEO of Bloomfilter. I've got these two esteemed gentlemen with me. Lieberman, you want to go first introducing yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Lieberman, and I lead our North America partner delivery practice, where we align with companies like Bloomfilter and make our joint customers super successful.
I love it.
Yep.
Wolfe?
Yep. I'm the co-CEO and co-founder of Bloomfilter, where I head up our engineering and product teams.
So out of respect for the audience's time, we are trying to keep this short, sweet. So we're going to hit the bullet points and go through this in a really tight way, get you guys in and out in less than 30 minutes. So Lieberman, many people here may be familiar with the fast-growing juggernaut of process mining, but in case somebody isn't, can you explain to the world why Celonis is like the hottest company when it comes to B2B SaaS, and what does process mining mean anyway, and why do your customers care and love you?
Yeah, well, that's a nice way to set up the question. But so process mining and process intelligence really came out of the academic study of how complicated a lot of companies' tech stacks became. If you think about a simple merger and acquisition, one company might use one source system, one company might use another, and then you start to try to combine the power of these large data sets to figure out what's actually going on in the company. And what Celonis can do is kind of give a visual MRI of these processes. These can be back office finance processes, AP, AR. They can be supply chain processes like inventory management and order management, or these can be a lot more niche industry use cases. So if you think about how a car is assembled on an assembly line, there is a robotic arm every step of the way. And with that robotic arm, there's a timestamp, there's a case ID, and there's an activity being executed. And so what Celonis does is it provides some of that business context transparency to a very complicated tech stack and ERP landscape.
Yeah, the thing that blew me away when I discovered Celonis a few years ago that I loved is, number one, you guys go in, and I guess we jointly now, but in and says, man, we can guarantee that we're going to unlock like $10 million of working capital because we know that there's all these inefficiencies stuck in the process. And then the other thing that it does that I think is so cool is that it says, you know what, your process probably isn't what you think it is. If you go ask a few people who participate in the process, what does your process look like? They're going to give you one answer, and it's going to look pretty good. And then if you go connect into the source systems and say, well, actually, your process is what your source systems say it is, because that's what you're using to actually execute it, you're probably going to find something totally different, right? Has that been your experience with customers?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's the traditional ops research. You're down on the factory floor, and then you're interviewing the people, and you sticky note the whole, the whole war room to figure out what's going on. And there's certainly credence to that, right? There's people that have been in the industry for a long time that do have insight into why certain processes work a certain way. But it's 2024, and almost everything has a digital footprint, right? Like, even if you order something from Amazon, it's scanned when it leaves the warehouse, it scans when it gets on the truck, and it scans when it gets to your door. Ideally, hopefully that happens every time in that order, as quickly as humanly possible. But I think we all know that's not exactly how it always happens. And if you think about this at the enterprise level, when you're doing billions of transactions, and transactions being orders, purchase orders, or like I said, the software development lifecycle, where there's a timestamp every time something is pushed or something is documented or sent to review, you can really gain insights at a macro level that can dictate company strategy. So the reason I love it, it's the most relevant form of data science I've ever seen, of intersecting business outcomes with the large sets of data we now see enterprise have.
Liz, that's our pull quote right there. It is the real world application of data science in probably the most meaningful way imaginable. Now, Wolfe, since before I met you, you have been obsessing over how to make software development more efficient, right? You've had a podcast on the topic. You've talked with world leaders like around the globe on it. I know this has just been a point of absolute obsession for you of how do we open up and improve the software development lifecycle. I'm curious, in your words, what about process mining makes sense in this like quest that you're on to transform the software development lifecycle?
Yeah, I think if you look at the way software development's done, it's done across many different systems. I believe Atlassian says at least 12 systems are involved in the SDLC by itself. And each one of those systems carries its own little treasure trove of information.
And what are some examples of those systems?
A Figma, GitHub. You got Figma for design, you got GitHub for code, source code management, you have Jira for project management, you have AHA for roadmap management, you got Circle CI for CI/CD, and I can keep going, right? Like these are all systems people have heard of, but I bet if you go and ask a CTO or a CIO, name all your systems in your process, they'll get 80% of them. But then there's that 20% that like, wait, we use that? There's no way we use that, right? I've never heard of that. And so when you have this treasure trove of data, the cool part about process mining is you can start to stitch it together, right? You can start to tell the coherent story of an idea has entered the business. It was discovered. It was defined here. It was designed. It entered development here. It entered QA here. The code was deployed into staging here. It got into production. Customers started using it. And you start to get this holistic story of what's happening in your software development lifecycle in a way you couldn't before with just regular data science and regular attempts at trying to stitch it together.
Yeah. So you think about this academic pursuit 10, 12 years ago, these German guys are sitting in a university classroom and learning about the concepts of process mining, right? And they go apply this academic discipline and they go create this unbelievably valuable organization, which is Celonis, helping companies transform process, around the globe. And what I think is so neat is now to bring the software development lifecycle into that sort of process framework around how we can improve. Now, Lieberman, I'm curious, like, we can't have been the first people that thought about the idea of like, hey, process mining makes a lot of sense. Software development's a complicated process. Maybe there's something there. Maybe there's like some peanut butter and jelly we can mash together and make a sandwich, right? I'm curious, as you've thought about the SDLC as a business process on your journey within Celonis, and tried to apply it in the real world. What has ultimately led to this partnership between Celonis and Bloomfilter to co-create Celonis for the SDLC?
Yeah, it's been an interesting. This is the first partnership of the kind where we're bringing an expertise in a certain process from another tech company on top of our platform. And I've been here a while now, and one of the things that we will never be as good at as you guys are is depth, right? Like Andrew, you are a software engineer who is obsessed with the software development lifecycle. No matter how much we try to replicate that academically, we will never be able to achieve just the tribal knowledge of someone with your depth of knowledge. So what we've pivoted a little bit from Celonis is the abstract we can be everything to everyone all the time, which is true. We can connect all source systems. We can do all processes. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do all source systems and all processes, as well as someone like you guys at Bloomfilter who have really narrowed your scope on an SDLC process with specific source systems that you really need to be a software engineer to understand. So this is where a lot of this partnership came from, is that we are now, as a platform company, providing the breadth for practitioners like yourselves to add the depth, and we can go to market together in a way that, although we're both process mining companies, process intelligence companies, there is no competition. There's no ego in the room. It's that we've got the platform, you guys have the knowledge. Let's go make customers successful.
Mm-hmm.
And Wolf, then I'm curious, right? So one of the things, there's two things that have struck me on this journey around transforming the software development lifecycle. The first is how many permutations of the problem exist when you think about the customer base, right? When you sort of started to lay out the number of tools that exist. What you didn't even start to get into then is the permutations of the processes that exist, right? And so you've now got, in number of in combinatorial of the various different tools that exist within the software development lifecycle. You've got different process modalities and process frameworks that exist customer by customer. And oh, by the way, it's not always even just customer by customer. A lot of times it's team by team, right? And so you start getting into so many different permutations of this, right? And the language of software development is so different than any other business process, right? So we talk about things like sprint points, and we talk about story points, we talk about, Dora, and we talk about all this other kind of stuff. And yet, at the end of the day, we're doing the same process analytics that you do in any other business process. We're looking at things like cycle time and rework. We're looking at things like defect rate. So like what you would call, like, for a payables, you might call on time and full, right? Or for delivery on a sales order, you might call on time and full. We're looking at, well, did you ship the initiative on time, on budget? And what was the defect ratio on it? I'm curious, sort of, in your journey, as the most native software development guy sort of on this webinar, I'm curious about sort of your reactions to, like, that journey, and sort of how you've seen that integration of, like, the classic ways that we think about process mining, process intelligence, process automation across the broader landscape, and then specifically how that sort of interacts with what happens within the software development lifecycle.
Yeah, I actually think because of the lack of visibility into the black box of software development, because of the complexity that you talked about, different teams doing different things, I think if people really understood what was happening, right? I'll use an example like a CFO. If you told your CFO that there was 1,000 ways you could send an invoice, the CFO call a timeout and say, we're going to figure that out. But I don't think the CTOs, the CIOs, the executives really have that level of insight because it is so dispersed in what's happening. There's so many tools to interrogate. And so they're forced to go into PowerPoint and Excel and get a rudimentary yet incomplete answer to a lot of those business questions. So they can't call timeout. There are no rules to call timeout for. And in that's where the beauty of the process mining can help us show, look, we have visualizations in our decks that show you the chaos that is software development. And in that, when we show people that, they're like, I had no idea this was happening. And now they can take action for the first time. They have the insight to be able to call that timeout and say, why are we doing it this way? And start to pull that chaos in and start to clean up the mess that happened because, software development is messy, and that's just something that I don't think people are fully aware of.
And can I add one thing on that? What's kind of interesting with software development and software engineers is it's a bit of the shoemaker's kids dilemma going barefoot. If you think about almost every technological revolution in the last 5 years, it's all about productivity, efficiency, and transparency. ERPs are supposed to be a source of truth for the way the business function records its inventory. CRM are supposed to be the source of truth so that a sales force and a marketing team can action on customers. Process mining is the same way, where it's supposed to be a source of truth of how your businesses are actually running. And this whole time, it's like, who's watching the watchmen? Nobody's watching the software engineers, and they're the ones building all these things. So it's a pretty interesting topic in general.
It's funny. We talk about developer experience a lot. And it's funny, you don't hear about salespeople experience. You don't hear about marketing people experience, accountants. Like, I'm sure salespeople get a lot of joy out of not having quotas, but we don't get rid of sales quotas, do we? But you tell the developers that they have to track productivity, and suddenly it's World War III and it's over. We're throwing down. It's crazy.
I couldn't agree more. The example that I use all the time, which just absolutely fascinates me, is that literally, when you think about software geeks, right? We have gone in and we have transformed every industry known to man to wring every bit of efficiency out of it. Finance, right? We're trading in nanoseconds with massive stat arbitrage, friggin' baseball, right? We have upended and completely changed sports metrics and sports analytics, and it is now down to a science of like which toe should you touch first base with as you're rounding the bag. And then in many organizations, you say, well, maybe we should start to standardize and provide some analytics and some measures around how we're building software. And Lieberman, I love that example of the cobbler's kid has no shoes, because we see it all the time where people go, oh no, software development's a creative process that we could never hope to quantify, analyze. And it's like, yeah, but if we find that there's a ton of rework happening, and if we find that like we're shipping a bunch of stuff that's not going through security review, like, are we sure that we don't want some process around this? And that's a conversation that we have all the time. I have a million questions. I'm going to keep going, but I do want to open up the chat. So if anybody wants to chat the host questions, or host and panelist, feel free to add your questions to this conversation, and I'll read them out. And so in the meantime here, I'm going to keep this rolling. So I think the other thing that the elephant in the room that we've got to make sure that we address as we think about process mining the SDLC is that artificial intelligence is going to be, without question, increasingly a part of the software delivery lifecycle, right? And whether that's at the one end, helping us make sure that we've got the right tabs and the right spacing, and adding in, some comments to our code, or at the other end, if we start to believe, the autonomous robots are going to be writing, shipping, and delivering everything themselves, AI is going to increasingly be part of this conversation. Wolfe, I'm curious how you think about an AI-driven SDLC and the role of process governance and process mining and process oversight in that world.
Yeah, I think if you look at the pre-AI world, what you see is that we were output restricted, right? If you could only produce so much software because humans can only type so fast, requirements can only be generated so quickly. But in a post-AI world, that's no longer the case. We're no longer output bound at all. AI can produce as much code as you want to pay OpenAI to generate for you. And so then it comes down to, are we following a process? It's process bound now. Can we reliably come up with good requirements? Can we reliably provide them to the machine? Can we reliably test them? Can we reliably deploy? And can we reliably support? Well, that's a process. And the companies and people that are going to win in this post-AI world are the ones that have the lowest iteration cycles and have the best process in being able to get requirements into production and being supported over time. And what you see in Bloomfilter and Celonis is we're that tool to help you look at the process, interrogate, and get your cycle time down to be able to compete in that world where, again, you tell OpenAI to generate a mobile app that does X, Y, and Z, and you're good at making requirements, it'll do just that. And now, how fast can you move? How fast can you get that to production for your customers?
The thing that always terrifies me, Wolfe, and I'm curious for your read on this, is we know in any organizations that has thousands of developers, we know that they are using AI, they're using copilots to write a lot of code. What we don't know oftentimes is how well that code is being reviewed before it goes into production. And is that creating either potential risks around QA, potential security vectors for exploitation? Like the governance is not keeping up with the output and the execution. And if we're not using AI as a signal to noise filter and a governance filter, then how the hell do we ever expect to understand what's happening and maintain observability and control over this process as it continues to accelerate?
I mean, we talk to CISOs all the time that tell us, I have no idea if my code is reviewed by my security team before it goes into production. And I wish that was just one company at like a very small company, but these are publicly traded companies that have this problem. And that's just one review process. That's DevSecOps. Like, it's one review process, but there's other review processes, not just security. What if compliance has to be involved? How does compliance know that you're not shipping code that isn't HIPAA compliant, or, FedWire, or whatever compliance you have to have? It's a huge problem. And as you speed up that process, as you reduce cycle time, the FDA doesn't take an excuse that, oh, sorry, I didn't get a chance to review that. We didn't have enough time. They're going to yank your license and you're not going to be able to ship code anymore. It's going to become an existential threat, not just from a security perspective, but also from a compliance and other types of regulatory frameworks that, these companies are required to follow.
Yeah, or even if you're not in a regulated environment, but let's pretend that you're shipping an update to, I don't know, a few 100,000 Windows endpoints that exist around the globe and, are relied upon by major airlines and other key folks, right? How do you make sure that that went through the right review process and that any conflicts in the code were sorted out and all that other kind of stuff?
Sounds
Again,
made
without
up.
naming any names.
It sounds made up. That never happened.
That never happens in the real world. The fastest way to make a race car increase velocity is by taking off the brakes, right? But if you don't have the governance, if you don't have the controls, if you don't have the ability to slow it down, then you create a lot more risk than you do velocity. So we've got a question from the audience here. They want us to get out of the ivory tower and talk brass tacks. What systems do we integrate with in order to process mine them and show some of these great insights that we've been talking about here?
Yeah, we start with your project management system, Jira, ADO. We're pulling that ticket information. What we find is that's the core of where the work is at least tracked. But we also know that the work doesn't always track that way. So we integrate downstream into GitHub to help you understand what's happening in my pull request and my actual source code. And then even down further stream, CI/CD, where Jenkins, Circle CI, we're looking at what's happening in your build process, right? And then upstream, we look at systems like Figma to help you understand, okay, so we know how the work's being done, but what's happening upstream before that work actually gets assigned to a development team. And so those are the core systems we like to talk about, but we're going to continue moving further upstream into things like road mapping tools like AHA and Product Board, and downstream into tools like AWS and Azure. So you can see not only what happened to my build, but what happened to my environments after that build occurred. Did we have a system downtime because we deployed bad code? Things like that are questions that CIOs and CTOs and other people in technology really care about.
And part of the partnership here is with our move to an object-centric data model, we can leave those sub-processes in place in a way that is more relevant to those who use it every day, right? The person doing GitHub pulls is going to think about the SDLC process different than the project manager in Jira or the designer in Figma. And what's a pretty exciting part of our platform is that we have those perspectives now, and we can see how these things operate in between the lines rather than just, isolated process from isolated process to isolated process. So, and being source system agnostic, that's where we can leverage your engine to bring it in and then really look at the sub processes, the adjacent processes, upstream, downstream, and sort of start to make some conclusions that go back to what you guys were just talking about, whether it be productivity or probably more relevant going forward. This is my not a very bold take, but compliance and regulatory risk and controls around it.
Love that. Lieberman, one other thing, and this has been part of what excites us so much about the Celonis integration. You guys have an action engine that so the question we got from the customer, I was leading to the answer a little bit, but the question from the audience here is all around. It's great to be able to analyze the process in retrospect. How do you actually get in front of it to solve it before it goes bad, right? And this is where we think about the action engine collaboration. I'm curious if you could just talk about kind of the way Celonis thinks about that in the broadest sense and how we're thinking about applying it to the SDLC.
Yeah, and I mean, this kind of goes back to AI and before it machine learning and before that statistics. They're totally different, all three of them. But the idea that you can sense patterns, and those can be as deeply technical as a black box neural net, or using what you know about the company and what they're trying to do, you can pretty easily, with 5 or 6 input variables, start to predict, hey, this code's already a week late. There's been a transition of software engineer as the primary owner. The project manager's on PTO. Chances are, I'm just pulling from the, off the cuff. Chances are this might not get reviewed in the exact way it's supposed to. And I think a lot of people think about AI and machine learning as a pretty unattainable sort of like shadow of the way things are functioned, but it could be as simple as that, where there's 4 or 5 very clean binary inputs that Celonis can then pick up pretty easily, and it can be as advanced as us writing back into the source system and reprioritizing the top priority, using the risk scores and things like that, or as simple as an email like, hey, Eric, Andrew, you might want to double click on this one. It's kind of violated 3 or 4 of the things we look for. And that orchestration is really where we see the platform going to, again, enable the experts like you to execute for the customers on a level of depth that we wouldn't be able to facilitate without the partnership.
Absolutely. I got a 2-minute lightning round for Wolf here, and then we'll wrap up. Wolf, we've talked a lot about this as a process debugger. We've talked less about it as a system of intelligence for how are we spending money, where is budget being allocated, how do we sort of translate between the world of what's happening inside the SDLC and what the business wants to understand. What are we building? When are we going to get it? How much does it cost? Can you talk a little bit about the capabilities and the vision around not just the like detailed, hey, we can eliminate rework, but then also like how this aligns the executive suite to the SDLC function?
Yeah, absolutely. We look at things from the sprints and the metrics, all that's rolls up to the actual outcomes that the business is looking for. We call those initiatives. And then we tie that out with financials. The idea here is based on how everything is done every day, we know whether or not your initiatives are going to be successful, and we know how much that's going to cost. And by taking that principled first, basic approach, we're able to do that in a way other platforms aren't.
Love it. So we got process translation, initiatives. What are we working on? When are we building it? When are we going to get it? How much is it costing? How do we do more with less? How do we eliminate waste? How do we eliminate rework? How do we reduce cycle time? All of the amazing things that we do once we can actually understand everything that's happening within the software development lifecycle. Wolfe, Lieberman, thank you guys so much for joining. We promised the audience less than 30 minutes, so we're going to get out of here on time. If anybody is interested in learning more, we'd love to show you the platform. You can either find us in the Celonis marketplace by looking for Bloomfilter or the SDLC. You can search there. You can also just go to bloomfilter.ai. We're doing the webinar right now. We have an ebook that you can download, and you can learn a lot more about the Gorpy details about how and why to process mine the SDLC. And we'd be happy to jump on the phone with you and show you a demonstration of how this stuff works, talk through your environment, and see if there's going to be a fit and everything else. So again, thank you, everybody. This is Celonis for the SDLC. This is probably the first of what we expect will be an ongoing conversation around using process mining to optimize software development.